tonight we're going to talk about remote AD. Next month we're going to meet at Burke and we'll talk with some other low altitude airspace users, and Drew, who I think is where'd Drew go? Anyway, Drew's helping us put that together, so we're going to talk about talk with some helicopter pilots and police helicopter pilots, and just talk about generally like sharing the airspace safely. In April, we'll have two presentations on mapping. Chad, who will be back in a minute, and Chad's going to talk about Pix4D, and I'm going to talk about Open Drone Map, and so we'll just get into a little bit of photogrammetry, mapping, 3D modeling stuff. So with that, tonight, our topic is remote AD. If you don't know what this is or haven't really looked into it, I'll talk for a few minutes and give kind of the very high-level remote ID for dummies presentation. I only know it on a very superficial level, and then we'll have Mike is going to talk a little bit. And ready for the mic? Okay. Mike's going to talk a little bit, and anybody else is welcome to share their thoughts on this. This is really intended to be an open forum for discussing questions or concerns about remote ID. To the extent that people have looked into it, we'll try and help answer questions. But this really is for everybody to kind of get together and talk through what we think the issues are. AV issues mostly. All right, so tonight I'll go through a remote ID overview, just talk about the timeline and process, what the NPRM is, basic principles, talk about what we're planning to do as NORCODA. Then we'll have a couple of people give their thoughts, and then we'll just kind of have an open discussion. As we go, if anybody has questions or if I'm saying stuff that doesn't make sense, let me know. And I think that's true for anybody that's talking. So, late in December, the FAA released this NPRM Notice of Proposed Rulemaking for Remote ID. It was published the end of December, and there's a 60-day comment window, which we're in right now, which wraps up March 2nd. And so basically the FAA said, hey, here's what we think the rules should be around remote ID. And if you're still wondering what remote ID is, I'll talk about that in a second. But just to give you kind of an idea of where we are in the process, the FAA said, all right, here's what we think the rules will be. Please give us your comments. We'll adjust and implement. And then the timeline for the rest of that looks like, I've heard discussion of approximately 2 years to finalize the rules. So we're talking about things that wouldn't go into effect for another 24 months potentially. I wasn't able to find a verified, a confirmed timeline for that. So if anybody knows differently on that 2-year bit, please let me know. But the timeline after that, after the final rule goes into effect, plus 2 years, manufacturers must comply with it, and then a year following, so we're talking 5 years out from now, pilots must comply. So that's sort of the general timeline of what this rule is about. So that's really just the FAA's cute little steps from their website. As of this morning, there's a page where web page where you can go and submit your comments, and this has a semi-live feed of comments. That's how many comments they've received on this rule so far. It's a big topic. You've probably seen people talking about it on Facebook and YouTube and wherever. But it has some pretty big implications for the industry and for recreational pilots as well. Basic principles of remote ID. So what is it? It's a method of providing identification information from your vehicle and also from your control station. It applies to recreational flights as well as commercial operations. It only applies in the US, this is the FAA rule. And some of the motivation from the FAA's point of view for why they would put something like this in place is to identify operating vehicles. So essentially a license plate, digital license plate that says, hey, that way there's some sort of system so that folks in law enforcement can say, hey, is that, I noticed this drone over a stadium, they're not supposed to be there, who is that? So it's kind of a license plate, gives folks an easy way to see who belongs to that craft. Another motivator is to provide info to manned aircraft. So folks in commercial airlines, Jason can speak to this, there's a lot of concern about suddenly there are 1 million drones in here, right? So this has turned into a big presence in what used to be fairly empty airspace just in the last 5 to 6 years. So the manned aviation is looking for a way to identify where are operations happening, like who's doing them, that sort of thing. So info to manned aviation, helping with local and federal law enforcement. Like I mentioned earlier, if you see a drone doing something untoward, then it's easier to figure out who's behind that activity. Or if it's not registered, to know that that's something that should be happening. So, and also, I haven't seen a lot of discussion of this, but I happen to have some awareness of this side of things. This is the USS and the drone operations providing their location and information into this sort of commercial ecosystem is one of the big drivers for this is enabling high density operations in the future. And so we're used to flying independently, but in order for the FAA and folks like the FAA to implement a much more automated system for traffic management, for dealing with separation, for that kind of thing, high density operations and autonomy requires a lot of vehicles announcing who they are and where they are and intent and that kind of thing. So this supports high density operations eventually. It's not really, remote ID is just one of the sort of fundamentals of that. It's not really a motivator for this particular rule, but it's a building block for sure. So, essentially, remote ID says you need to announce your location and your intent and tell us some information about who you are and what you're doing. In one of these top 2 ways here, standard remote ID, limited remote ID, or if you don't have it, you can only fly in certain designated areas. So really similar to what's going on with recreational within the kind of LANCE or within controlled airspace, if you want to fly in controlled airspace, being restricted to AMA fields and things like that. So if your operation, your vehicle is not remote ID capable, you're limited to specific places to fly. You can no longer just go and fly at Lakewood Park. So the standard remote ID has essentially two ways of broadcasting position and owner information. One of those is, and this is constantly happening, so you will need some hardware to allow you to announce that from the aircraft, and as well as from the control station over the internet. And so that information is going, I'm unclear on the aircraft part, but I know from the control station point of view, that information is going to a UAS or a USS or a UAS service supplier. Basically an industry organization, not the FAA, but an industry organization that's charged with managing traffic activity in a certain area. So you are constantly piping out this information about who you are and what you're doing. Obviously, current hardware can't do that. So this will require some hardware updates. It also requires a continuous internet connection. So you can see how this might be problematic in very rural areas, in certain parts of the world where just a handy internet connection is not that available. Limited remote ID, very similar, but it's only coming from the control station. Still constantly being piped out over the internet to a USS, but you have some additional restrictions as well. Your operation is limited to 400 feet from you or from the control station. So it's really, according to the current rule, and this is a proposed rule, you're going to be in one of these 3 boxes. So, and this just visually is the same thing. So, starting with the not remote ID capable vehicles, you're just in one of these approved airfields, and they have, you're very buttoned up in where you are and what you can do. Pilots flying without remote ID capability. Limited remote ID, you're sending your information from the control station via the internet up to a USS. Some subset of that information goes to the FAA. The USS retains part of that information for some number of months, so they have all of your operation info. And then importantly, this information is live through a public portal as well. So this is one of the contentious issues, as I understand it, is under remote ID, if you're complying at all, it's possible for the general public to know who you are and specifically where you are. And I won't, I think some of the discussion that comes later tonight will deal with that, but just note that, the public knowing where the operator of a specific vehicle is a big part of this. And that's a big change, because that's not necessarily true now. And then the standard remote ID, your drone is broadcasting, and your control station is also broadcasting to here. What else? What you can do, I'll really sort of say this for later. We'll come back to this slide, actually. But so if you have questions or concerns, we're going to talk about them here. If you want to leave tonight and do something and submitting your comments to the FAA is a very appropriate thing to do. Especially if you have specific concerns and suggestions about how to change that. These are the links. I'll send all this stuff out. I'll put it on Facebook and send it out in an email. So if you connect with us in those ways, you'll get it. If not, let me know. I'll make sure you get a copy of this. So it's pretty easy to comment. You really just go to this link. There's a comment now button, and it has that little counter that I showed you earlier. One thing to know about that is your comments are made public, including your contact info. So if you're planning to comment, just know that that will be a public comment, because that's part of this process. And then we, as an organization, NORCODA, we're going to compile our position on remote ID and our comments and any concerns that we have based on what we think currently, and also based on discussion that happens here tonight. And we'll submit those under the name of our organization as well. Who knows how much weight that will carry, but as an organization trying to represent the community, that's what we're planning to do as well. So you can also help us review those before we send them out. We'll send them out to the community and get some feedback. Panel discussion. And at this point, I'll jump back over to this diagram, because this will probably frame some of the discussion, and have Mike, hi Mike, sorry I didn't give you a heads up there, have Mike offer some of his comments. Before Mike starts, does anyone have questions on anything that I said or comments?
You've got the first two there, you've got under standard remote ID,
yeah.
You've got no information or no designation about flying within visual line of sight, but the second one does. Does that mean that there will be no requirement to be visual line of sight?
That I don't know. I don't, it's not my understanding that this opens up beyond line of sight flight. I think it's probably, if you want to be able to do that in the future, it would need to be under this bucket.
That's what's been discussed online a lot is, that's the benefit of remote ID, is it opens up the possibility of extended beyond line of sight flight, but the only way that you would be granted a waiver for beyond line of sight is if you complied with the full standard remote ID package.
Got it.
And then the other thing I want to say is that you've got restrictions far greater than you have for general aviation at the moment, or the light sport aircraft category of aviation.
Yeah.
You don't have that public thing, you don't have to have a transponder, you don't have to have any ID, remote ID.
That's very true. Yeah.
Well, it's changing though with ADSB.
Well, it's changing, but they said that 10 years ago.
But now that it's going to be a requirement in 2020.
It will?
Well, DJI is making them.
No, I don't mean for, I'm
just for general aviation?
Yeah.
Just for general aviation, I believe it's going to be a requirement. Well,
It already is. It says January 1st, 2020 was
Yeah,
the
that's
requirement
right.
for
Yeah.
for ADSB, yes.
ADSB, but that's only for
Yep.
controlled airspace.
Okay.
Right, but for
That's-
general aviation, not drone flying.
That's
Correct,
not
correct.
true.
But I think what they're gonna do, I think that we're gonna talk about all this, and what's really gonna end up happening is what the roadmap shows is that ADSB is gonna be in a drone anyway. Because you're gonna
Right.
wanna see it, if you got it in your airplane, you're gonna wanna know it, especially with the amount.
I know, but currently, probably the vast majority of general aviation aircraft don't, and light sport aircraft being manufactured today don't have it.
My father will absolutely not put it in his airplane, and he won't fly in any controlled airspace because of it.
Right.
He absolutely despises this FAA.
Good night.
So, but I think that the hurdle they're going to have to do is figuring out that ADSB platform and linking it with an internet so you can see as the pilot. But I don't think the discussion's really over with. It's gonna be ADS-B, and it's gonna be a requirement. Like I said, DJI's doing it with all their stuff this year.
Yeah, I've heard that for going forward, but I still questioning when they are really going to require it. And because the thing is, as Corey was saying, this first category is great if you're in a congested area. Most of the people, let's say, I can't say most people, let's say I hear that a lot of people don't fly in congested areas and they're out in the, out in the boondocks, whatever, as do many pilots of general aviation. So
Yeah,
therefore, you're not in a congested area anyway.
Right.
So it's almost like a moot point because you're not in congested areas, so you don't have to worry about it. You still have to have a good lookout when you're flying. I mean,
Right.
because I've been flying for many years, and it's surprising that huge sky, but sometimes you do suddenly see where did he come from? And when you're just keeping a good lookout. But so it just seems like it's going way ahead on a small portion compared to how many general aviation aircraft are flying. And I can fully understand and agree in congested airspace where you need to. And I think one of the things they're thinking about is if we ever do get to that point where we're going to have man-carrying drone-type aircraft, multi-rotor.
I think that actually, it's funny, people talk about the congested airspace and the classified airspace in that, but I've been flying radio-controlled, I absolutely refuse to call it remote. I didn't have a radio transmitter.
Yeah.
So I've been flying since I was 4 or 5 years old, building with my dad. And I still think when you look at what's happening, yeah, the congested airspace or the classified airspace, but more importantly, you got helicopters landing at hospitals that are not in a classified airspace. And they're coming in hot. They're coming in under 400 feet. And I can tell you this from where places I've flown at. And I think that it's gonna be that requirement again. It's gonna be a forcible, you got an aircraft in your area that ADS-B is gonna kick in and you're gonna be forced either to land or something else. But I think what I'm trying to say is the classified airspace is gonna expand for drones, specifically for drones. And it's gonna be because of those air ambulances and those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I fully understand those too, but and those would generally be in a congested area. Because currently, rules are for general aviation, you're not legally allowed to fly below 500 feet unless you're in an open area or over water, then you can be as low as you want.
Right.
So if you're in any of the areas, like if you can't be in a built-up area or anything like that, you can't be that low. So therefore, we're still in a buffer area. If we were limited to 400 feet to fly drones, you still have a 100-foot buffer, but so we're not, in other words, it's not going to get into a new area where general aviation are going to be down below 400 feet. So that it would never be congested, if you know what I mean.
Correct.
It would be just like if they
The
start
only thing that is coming in that low is again.
yeah, in special little areas, and any responsible drone pilot's going to know where those areas are and avoid those.
I was flying a model airplane in Norwalk 3 weeks ago, just flying around, and I knew where I was. Sure enough, light flight came into Fisher Titus there, and he was low, and I landed. But I was at the fairgrounds, I was half a mile away, but I saw him coming in, and he came in low for no reason.
Yeah, because you can hear them a long way off too. Plenty of time.
Well, I think your point about having some of these restrictions being more restricted than they are even in aviation is definitely a good one. Do you have comments on that one? Or do you want to-
Not specifically. But won't you need that for the FedEx and the UPS
For the deliveries?
for the knock that they trying to run?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it'll need some kind of system like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those are all going to be on a line of sight, multiple aircraft by a single
I
controller.
got another question though. If they live in a package more than 55 pounds, how they get away with that?
Yeah, that's
Part 333 exemption.
Yeah.
I think they'll leave it on a truck.
Yeah.
Part 333?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's hear from Mike.
I'm Mike Shaler. I'm the secretary at NORCODA. My company is Akron Drone Services. I don't know if any of you are Drone U members. I'm a member, I think Jason is. Anybody else a member of Drone U? It's,
Oh, yeah.
okay, yeah,
Drone
so,
coach or drone U
I'm sorry?
or drone U or drone coach? One of
Drone
them.
U, yeah.
Drone U.
Yeah, it's an organization that has a lot of educational classes and so forth. I think they've got a Part 107 class as well. But they have a lot of online classes and so forth. They have a YouTube channel, which I would recommend you guys check out. There's gotta be 1,000 videos on there about anything you can imagine to do with drones. Are you familiar with them? Yeah. And they're very active in this remote ID whole situation. And they've put out several videos just about that. So I've got a lot of my information from there. I've done some other research as well. I don't claim to be an expert. I just have strong opinions about some of it. So one of the things that I think a lot of people can agree about is that remote ID was originally, as it was intended, was really going to be something good. So it would expand a lot of things like we talked about, the line of sight, maybe for the Amazon or UPS, FedEx being able to deliver packages, which really doesn't affect us too much, but flying multiple drones for shows and stuff like that. I think this was supposed to be something that was going to enable a lot of different new activities with drones. But as the proposed rule has come out, I don't think that that's really been the way that we've received the proposed rule. And I think there's several organizations that have come out strongly against it, one of which is DJI. I don't know if anybody's read their position paper on that. It's widely available across the internet, and I've got a link for that too. That if Corey, if you don't have that, I'll give that to you, and we can send that out as well. So DJI's position was, yeah, we need remote ID, but not this remote ID, not the way they put it out.
Well, also, AOPA has got a drone division, and they're also throwing some things out that they don't.
Who does? I'm sorry.
AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association.
Okay, right, yeah.
So-
There's a number of organizations that put out positions on it, no doubt. And if that's something that we don't have published, maybe you guys could just send us a message on our Facebook page, or send an email to us through our website, and let us know. We'll add that to the list. And so as Corey kind of laid out, the three different sort of categories. I just made some notes about that. I'll read them real quick. Maybe they're redundant, but hopefully there's something in there that you can pick up. The categories are the standard remote ID, internet-based network operations that broadcast the position of the pilot, the location of the drone, and telemetry. It requires a good quality and persistent internet connection. The drone sends its message to a provider, like Corey was saying, the USS, that disseminates that message to all concerned with the operations. And then the second category, the limited remote ID, you would operate in this category if no good internet connection is available. You would be limited to operations 400 feet from the controller or base station. And as soon as those words come out of my mouth, I imagine everybody's thinking, well, shoot, what the heck good is that? 400 feet's nothing, right? And the third is the FRIA, or the FAA Recognized Identification Area. That's for recreational flyers, and only allows operations at locations recognized by CBOs, community-based organizations like the AMA, and there's other organizations too. There's no transmission requirements, but you're limited to 400 feet of operation from the controller. Something else about those FRIAs, or FRIAs, is that they have a 12-month period where they're going to accept applications to be one of those recognized areas, and after that they're shutting it down. Now, I don't know about you guys, but where I live in Monroe Falls, there was a model, an AMA field right by the Summit County Fairgrounds, and that's gone. The park came in and took over some land, and they said, we don't want the model aircraft buzzing around and scaring the animals or something. So that one went away. So what do you do if your recreational flyer in your area goes away? There's not going to be any new ones granted after the 12-month period. At least that's the way I read the proposed rule, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, eventually you're going to need to add some new ones.
It's
So
just like saying no new airports after
right,
the end of the year.
exactly. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. So I think there was an organization and I forget the acronym for it, maybe one of you guys knows, but they had a bunch of groups get together and propose, ideas for this remote ID program, and seems like they didn't take many, if any, of their ideas. So that was really a disappointment. And the way I understand it, no drones that any of us currently own now would meet the proposed requirement of RID as is in their proposal. So that's something to think about, is how is that going to, Chris?
Did they say anything about who the remote ID UAS service suppliers were going to be?
I don't know that I've read that. I think that hasn't been announced or decided. Do you know?
My understanding is there's a variety of, they're commercial organizations, so it's not the government, it's not the FAA. It's industry organizations like Kitty Hawk, AirMap would be a good example. The kinds of organizations that provide land services now.
Okay, so it's not the telecom.
It's not the
It's not
telecoms.
like
I mean,
that. Because
the
my understanding was that, like, you were gonna require to potentially have a cell phone subscription related to your drone.
Right.
a UAS or a USS subscription would be required, as I understand it. Yeah, and they're in theory that's minimal. It's like $3 or $4 a month. But they'll have a pretty big monopoly.
I have read something.
They won't have much motivation to keep the costs low, I would think.
I mean, how are they gonna track it? So, like, that's the question, like, they have to track the signal, so that's coming off of what?
It's got to be from a cell phone provider, and
Yeah,
and I have
it's
read.
internet-based, yeah.
I've read some places that some people believe that Verizon is one of the big.
Verizon's working on that now. They
Right.
bought that Skyward, and that's what their big
Mhm.
thing is that they're
Right.
developing that to use with the cell phone towers. And that's how they were thinking about tracking it.
Mhm.
But again, ADSB's out there, why would you do something different?
Maybe the commercial aviation industry doesn't want more signals clogging their monitoring systems, and if they're using ADSB to track commercial aircraft, why do you want 1.5 million
If you're in
drones
an
flying in?
airplane, then you wanna know where that drone's at?
Not at 30,000 feet.
No, exactly.
fly it.
The majority, 99.9% are gonna be way above any drone flying.
Yeah,
Well, that's not
that's the
even,
thing,
like,
it's-
actually
there's still
close, right?
100 feet of separation in
Fly
any
a
aviation
Piper
rule
Cub with no
versus.
battery and no power at all, no electrical. And it comes in and out of Huron, and we see the people flying every day, all day at Firelands College right there.
Well, I mean,
All day, every day, we avoid them. So if you're coming in for a landing and you got ADSB, I'm sure you'd want to know if something's at the end of the runway.
no, I agree with you, I think it makes sense, but my question is, that's not even fully implemented for manned aircraft yet, is it?
No, it's not.
But neither
How
is
long
this.
has that process been
But
going on?
that's actually in place now. I mean, it's being used, but this isn't even being used. You
Oh,
know
well, that's
what I
not
mean?
true, that's not true.
Well,
There is drone detection
They did. I
throughout the
know they
country
tried
right
to
now,
roll it
not
out.
like everywhere, but I know for a fact, it's not something I really discuss a lot of, but there is drone detection being done.
oh, I know
in
there
the
is some,
country.
yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
very familiar with that. But for the most part, for everybody, you and me.
Oh,
this
no,
is
there's no
used-
way to view it unless you're one of those organizations that's allowed to view it. I mean,
Right,
it's
right.
not a commercially available, like, system for manned aircraft is.
Correct.
Correct, absolutely.
Have they, who's gonna decide on what organization will be monitoring it then?
I would assume that's going to have to be the FAA, right? I don't really know the
Well,
answer to that.
the only reason I ask is because I was involved with the FAA when the light support aircraft category came in. We had a year before anybody was informed, where we had telephone discussions, it was a panel of 12. And then after that year, when we sort of hacked away to get a big block, let's say, then it was opened up to aircraft manufacturers. And then we went on for another 2.5 years of discussing it. Those meetings were always held at the EA headquarters in Arce. And then we broke down from there into small groups of 6 to 8, where we discussed different things from different manufacturers or from different areas of flying machines, be it powered parachute, delta wings, gyrocopters, things like that. And then we had a member of the FAA sit in. In other words, one of our group of 6 or 8 people was always an FAA person, but he wasn't there to do anything other than monitor. and make notes. And then after all of that was hashed out, then as a collective group of 100 plus members, we put out who was going to be the organization, or we had a list that we would all decide on who was going to be the one to do the certification or to create the certification standards. And we ended up with ASTM as our choice, and that went forward. So that was nothing to do with the FAA, it was left to the people making the aircraft and flying. So that's why I wondered who was going to choose, because I don't think the FAA generally wanted to be the one to say.
I believe the discussion around who gets to be a USS is essentially shaped like commercial organizations or coalitions of commercial organizations can get together and say, we want to provide services over this geographical area or this time band or whatever. I think it's essentially like regionally. There would be USSs and they would overlap potentially. And so you would, in the case of Ohio having 2 USSs, you'd be in multiple coverage areas. You get to sort of choose in the way that you choose your cell service provider currently. You have a couple of choices, in theory.
It would be a 5G network?
What's that?
5G network?
I think this is intended to align with 5G. I don't think 5G is a requirement for it.
No, I'm saying though, so I'm talking about a particular internet provider,
Yeah.
particular service putting out the initial signals and everything else you need to pick up on the internet and everything else. It'd be a 5G network.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one that's according to the laws largest right now, and that's.
Good.
Well, there is no 5G really
Huh?
in the US. Right now, there's a couple test locations for it. So my company does telecom. We fly cell phone towers in preparation for installing all the 5G equipment. So I happen to know a little bit about this. There's a group of towers out in Austin. There's a couple other areas. But the thing about 5G technology is it doesn't reach as far.
What towers are
No, it's a smaller,
technology.
the technology itself, the signal doesn't go out as far. But what it is it's more dense and they can pass more amount of data. So they actually, unlike the traditional like 4G or the versions before it where they could have the towers maybe be, and I don't know the actual mileage on this, I'm just throwing some big numbers out there. Towers could be 10 miles apart and it could create a network that
So they
still
just keep
may,
jumping off tower
now
to
they may
tower.
need to be 5 miles apart.
What
So I'm not
5G
saying that it
does-
won't make a stronger signal, but it will not reach as far. So they're
You
gonna have to
have a
build
tower.
more towers and make it more dense for 5G to really work.
So
So
if
in
you go-
rural areas, you're not getting 5G.
So pretty
It's
much
gonna
if you go
be
a certain distance,
strictly in
if you go a certain distance or you pass one tower, when you get close to the other tower, it's gonna jump off that tower to that one.
That's what it does now.
Yeah.
It's the same thing,
Handoff
it's,
that happens,
but they have, 5G is not gonna be,
They can't
No, I'm
use
not
it.
saying it is. I'm just-
but it's not gonna be a savior for this. Because the fact is, they're only gonna be putting 5G in areas where they can group them really close together. Because if they can't, there's no real point to 5G unless you're like right by that tower, right? So you're not gonna see 5G out in rural areas to start.
I'm saying, but that's the point though, because T-Mobile just bought Sprint yesterday.
It did?
It was
Right.
approved.
Yeah.
But what the 5G works
There
different.
goes my
equipment.
Calyx
The
Institute.
5G, when you see a cell tower, you see a cell tower, and you see the antenna arrays, and you see all the radios and the cabling. The 5G will, chances are, will have maybe 1 or 2 they call a spur in an area. And I'll give you a good example. Norwalk, Ohio, has a system that they're putting in, and it's microcell. And it can be advanced into the 5G and what they use it for, and it's about 2 5-gallon bucket sizes stacked on top of each other is the size of the array.
Yeah.
And it sits on top of a telephone pole.
Yep.
And then that's gonna be connected with your other ones, and they're within a half a mile for that. A typical cell phone tower, you can have 10 to 15 miles away, depending. If you haven't connected with a line of sight satellite, you can go 15, 20 miles.
He's talking small cell technology. It's really common in urban areas
That's
again,
what's
because they can
gonna
put them
hit.
together and
Your
they get really good
neighborhoods,
signal.
your
And you don't
shopping
have to
malls.
be way high up and all the other stuff for a cell phone tower, right? Putting up cell phone towers is a really long process, right, to get a new one. SureSight is actually one of the, is out of Cleveland, is one of the leading small cell
I heard
producers.
you talking about
So that's local to us.
Town Castle, maybe we'll talk later. I worked, I put up, I did SBA section 333 and.
Okay, yeah.
I actually taught hundreds of people.
We should
at
definitely talk
Tower.
offline. The SBA guys love me, give me a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, let me bring it back to Lucian's question real quick, which was, who decides who the USS UAS service suppliers are, who are these USSs and what do they cover? And I think the sort of the bottom line is there may be several in an area, or there may be none. Ideally, there are more than one in every geographic area, but I think as the pilot, you're going to use whatever internet service you already use, and you're going to also have a subscription to these guys.
Well, is that really true though? Because I heard it's, our current internet service is run off of the iPad. And what I've heard about the law is that the drone itself has to be internet based.
Yeah.
You can't use that link that we have, because if you lose communication link with your controller, you no longer have
There's an
the
interface
ability
gap.
to track the drone.
There's an interface
So
gap
it's
between
going
the
to have to
controller
be
to
some
the
type of
drone.
service and a chip on the drone itself, and that's why your drone's not gonna be applicable.
There are two classes of remote ID, and standard remote ID, yes. Your drone has to be able to connect to something, provide its information to the USS. Your control
Independent
station
of the
also
base
has to.
station.
Base station
Yeah,
also has to.
independent, but is that in addition to ADSB?
I believe under this, thinking ADSB is not a part of it.
That's for
Yeah.
manned aircraft.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so one of the early providers, Precision Hawk, a company that does a lot of the online of sight stuff right now, came up with a system a few years ago called Lattice. And Lattice was their own version of remote ID. You bought a couple of $100 really small backpack that you put on your drone, and it worked with any drone, and it was a Verizon cellular service. And that Verizon cell signal beaconed to their monitoring system through Verizon's network, and it was a private monitoring solution. The problem was, because I subscribed to that a couple of years ago, and the only problem was when I kept looking at the console, I was the only drone that was on it, because nobody else was buying it. But that's the way they did it. They used to retrofit an existing drone. It was a really small beacon that established a cellular connection and beaconed to the monitoring network.
But your cell phones now, no matter who you're with, AT&T, T-Mobile, whatever, Sprint, they're dropping signals in different places, even in major towns. So how are they gonna be
It's a
able to-
problem.
Well,
If
It's
they
gotta be a
can't do it
problem,
with your
yeah.
phone, how in the world are they gonna do it with drones?
I have a question. Why do we need a cell service? Your drones currently, your DJI products currently today transmit out their location.
Right.
Well,
Well,
that's
why-
one of
why is
my,
that?
Because money's
Why do we
involved.
need to have why do we need
Because
cell phone
the
companies
cell
involved?
tower
in it?
can track it and money's involved.
Yeah,
That's
it
the
should-
only
Right.
reason.
It'll
Well,
just
I
be-
know it's involved, but it doesn't mean
It
that
should
the
be
point of
something going to the
this
GPS,
talk here is to talk as a
because
group
that's
Right.
and to
everything.
put questions back on the FAA. Why are they letting the telecom companies come in and charge us for something that the technology currently today already does? And the only thing you need to do is tell the manufacturers of non-DJI products, we're also transmitting their signal out to allow the systems that can track that today, that do not require any of the cell phone stuff, to be able to read their signals.
I sat
The solution
in-
is here.
I sat in with the FAA, and they had their conference in 2015 when they were first rolling out the exemptions for the Section 333. And
Yeah.
they literally said, we are going to let the industry drive this. We don't have the money for it. So we're going to follow behind and see what they do. And I think that's what they're doing. I think they don't have the department to start developing, an ADSB specially for drones, but Verizon can step in and buy Skyward and say, hey, guess what, FAA, we can have a system for you. And I think that's what it is. The FAA has no money to do this with. They're letting the industry guide them. And that's what everything we do with our comments online, that's where it's going, just like you said. So,
Well, guys, get ready to be owned by the telecom companies, right?
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to me.
yeah, absolutely.
Just to throw us.
What's wrong with the DJI solution?
Well,
The competitors don't want to use it?
Well, it requires the infrastructure. You have to set up all the monitoring systems. They're out there now. That's some
But
of
it
the stuff
doesn't
that I can't
require-
really discuss too much.
It doesn't
but
require-
they're
it
out
doesn't
there now.
require us as drone owners.
You don't have to do anything.
Right, so basically 80% of the drones that are flying in the US now are DJI drones, right?
Yeah.
So 80% of the drones are already equipped.
Well, and it's very important for you to understand this. The only reason that the solutions that are based on the DJI product now can't detect your other drones is because they won't give the producer of that system the codes to hack their system. That's all they're doing. They're just hacking the encrypted code as it comes over, and that is telling the drone location. So it's a software. It's a software fix.
So
It's as easy as writing a mandate that if you want to sell a drone in the U.S., you have to give the code to hack this particular information. That's
Nobody will ever say that.
So kind of moving on a little bit here, one of the things that we as NORCODA are going to be concerned about, and other educational entities, are how is this going to affect our programs for kids. So as NORCODA, we go out to some schools and put on programs and let kids fly, you know, our little cheapy drones and stuff like that. What about STEM education? How is that going to affect this? So those are all things that are going to, I think, hurt those programs, because we're going to have extremely limited areas to fly. So we can't just go out to a local school that's in Class G airspace and just, you know, fly with the kids. We can't do a flight demo with one of our bigger drones, nor are they going to be able to fly, you know, some of the smaller ones. There's also potential issues with CoOPA violations, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule. So the thought about that is, not all pilots are above 18 years old. So what is that going to do if they're broadcasting their location or personal information? There's some potential issues there. How will non-compliant operators be found? Is there going to be, you know, widespread compliance with these new rules? I don't know. I know plenty of guys, friends of mine, that have drones that say, you know, the heck with it, let them come catch me. So I know there's Chris can probably address this more than I can, but, you know, I know there are ways to detect the drones, but if it's so widespread, you know, the FAA is not really doing a super great job of bringing down or, you know, reining in illegal operators as it is. So, you know, it's my belief that compliance with these new rules are going to be poor at best. If you want a good resource, in my opinion, on how to comment, droneadvocykit.com, droneadvocykit.com, and we'll send that out. I think you have to put in an email to get it, to download it, but it's not an email capturing scheme or something they're going to market to you, but it's a guide that you can download from DroneU, and it gives some guides. So one of the things that you don't want to do is copy and paste, because the FAA, when they're reading the rules, or reading the comments, they're going to be able to tell, and I'm sure they've got some software that's going to go through and see that if 100 people took something from the AMA and just changed their name and email address and sent it in as their comment, they're going to know that they're going to count those 100 as one comment and not 100. So one of the recommendations is to personalize it. How does it personally affect you? And so I've put together some thoughts about that, how that's personally going to affect me. You know, and I own 6 drones myself. If all of those are, you know, rendered useless, that's going to put a serious, you know, hurt on me. How do I recoup that investment? What about the investment I've already made? What about having to invest in another cell plan or an extra large data plan that's, as I'm broadcasting, you know, to these cell phone providers?
Not only that, but your new acquisition of a drone, because drones we have right now are going to be worthless. They're going to have no resale value, and we have to go out and
Right,
start all over
absolutely,
again.
yeah.
So that's another bad.
So, yeah, I mean, that in alone makes people not want to be compliant.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, one of the reasons I got my Part 107, one of the reasons I buy, you know, I keep maintenance logs, you know, I try to do everything, you know, by the book so that, I don't have to worry about anything. You know, and I don't want to fly and be non-compliant. But this sure won't make it easy, that's for sure.
You mentioned that third block is recreational. Does that mean that for the first two, you have to be 107 certified?
No.
No?
Every category there can be recreational.
Okay.
I think that's right, I don't know, I'm not an expert on that.
But yeah, I
that's
think
right,
recreational, commercials, and
yeah. Let's see. So, one of the solutions that I would offer is that implement the broadcast-based ID only, which would enable. Let me see. It's been a while since I reviewed this. I kind of forgotten about how that works. The internet-based is cost prohibitive, like we've been talking about, and there's a broadcast only, which is similar to what we have now. Yeah, you don't have to worry about FISA or the COOPA law violations. That would eliminate a monthly subscription to a USS and eliminate surveillance opportunities of pilots and operators, which is something we don't really talk about. But if the public is able to, as Corey's graphic here indicates, there's talk that people will be able to download an app on their phone and they'll be able to track you and find you. So I've never had anybody irate, come up to me and give me a hard time. But I know there's plenty of people that have. So there's always a chance that if somebody knows that you're coming, let's say you're doing a construction site progression video or report, they might know that you're gonna, where you fly, and they can just monitor and, come give you a hard time, or, maybe worse. There are no women in here tonight, but we do have occasionally some female flyers that come to our meetings. That's always a concern for women pilots is, somebody might find out where they are, somebody might start creeping on them and, come after them, and, or guys with long hair, that could be an issue too.
I don't understand that part of it. I mean, why is that part of the rule? The rest of it I could sort of.
Well, and that's, we have
I mean, they
license
give you
plates
any
on our
rationale
cars.
for that?
Do they actually give you, like, are they talking about actually giving the name of the person who's flying there, or
Your
just that
personal-
there's a drone?
It'll be
Well,
all
your
your
personal
data.
information would be
Yeah.
available.
Yeah,
Your personal
your
information.
name and address.
And I can understand a drone in the area,
No,
like that
no.
makes sense, but like to actually know physically who the operator is?
and physically where
I mean,
they
because I don't know who's driving next to me.
Right.
Let's be
And-
honest,
and so that's-
there's no database for me to go pull up their license plate number so I can find out who cut me off,
Right.
right?
So if we had a system similar to what our licensing system is for our cars, sure, we all, as commercial operators, have to put our registration number on the outside of our drone, similar to a license plate on a car. But nobody's gonna look at that number and know where you're physically operating at right now, or where you live, or any of that kind of stuff. And it doesn't specifically say that in the proposed rule, but it leaves that door open, that is a possibility that information can be made available. So that needs to be spelled out specifically that it's not all.
Yeah, so the big concern is, you're right, I don't care if somebody knows that a drone is flying in an area, but the whole thing about the ground control station, that's the one that to me is a huge safety concern.
Right.
Because I do, if I'm doing a farm, I'm very rural, and I could be the only person in that whole area. And my equipment that I'm not flying a Spark when I'm doing a farm. It's a more expensive platform. That puts me at risk because I can be out flying and somebody can say, well, that guy's flying a farm. I know he's got expensive equipment.
Yeah.
And, they could come out to want to procure my drone.
The other thing is you're
that becomes
concentrating
a
on
safety
flying.
issue.
Absolutely.
Exactly, you're supposed to be
Yeah.
watching the bird.
Yeah, you're concentrating on flying, not what
Right.
might be creeping up behind you.
Right.
And that's
Well,
just-
like, the cops have the ability to run your license plate, I think it's fair that law enforcement would have the ability to know what
And
the
that's- yeah,
controller
that's
is.
fine,
But
yeah.
like, why, you're right, why the
Why
general
does the public, if they have a problem, they can always, make a call, no
Yeah.
doubt.
Yeah,
I'm
and
sure
it doesn't have an
database will start
impact
after that.
on
I'm sure database-
Amazon or UPS,
No.
It's like
because
Texas.
they're gonna be
That's what I
controlled
said.
from
Stick that in another
some,
license plate.
you know,
They can do that.
concealed location.
Sorry.
So if they're flying all beyond line of sight, fully automated, there's nothing to track for them other than the location of the drone.
Right.
So all these rules that are written benefit them and have a negative impact on the individual flyers.
I've heard people made the comparison to manned aviation pilots. Well, you know, we know where the pilot is for the airplane, but, you know, I bet I couldn't get within 10 feet of Jason when he's flying, you know, sitting in the cockpit at the airport without, you know, a ticket and boarding pass. You know, so nobody's
Unless you
just,
want luggage.
nobody's just gonna walk up to an airplane. There's security measures in place. We don't have that when we're out at a farm or when we're out flying a cell phone tower or a construction site or a house for a realtor or whatever.
Remote bridge,
Anything.
train tracks, electrical lines.
Right. So that's about all I've got. I think the thing is
I would think, I would think that would be your strongest argument, is just the privacy. I mean, why do you have to give up privacy to fly a drone that you don't have to give up in a whole lot of other areas? It's just.
But any other aviation base?
Correct, any other aviation base, you don't have to give up all your information.
I think the privacy issue for the pilots is a major issue, and the other one is, what's it gonna cost us? I mean, nobody knows what it's gonna cost. Is it gonna cost us, what if you've got a fleet of, 20 drones? Is it gonna cost you another $100 a drone or $1,000? What about your data plan? Nobody knows what the data plans are gonna cost us. So why do they put that on us as the drone pilots to have to pay for all that stuff? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and that seems to be, the four major response categories in the response are cost, logistics, privacy, and compliance. And, privacy is probably where I would focus my responses. But, compliance is the other, or logistics even. Right now, all of the regulations proposed in this are focused on the drone operators. There's no regulations yet written on the USS providers. So right now, who knows? I mean, they could say, oh, it's only going to be $2.50 a month.
Right.
Big deal. Well, I remember my cable bill the first year I bought it was $80 a month, and here I am 3 years later at $250 a month. So, who knows what
You need every channel.
what's that?
You really need every channel.
Well, I can watch The Big Bang Theory in 10 languages, so that's all good.
Well, then it's worth it.
But that's, that's my big concern. And they said, well, then you just implement more regulations on the USS. Oh, great, more regulations. So, more government involvement in the process.
Sorry to interrupt you, but speaking to that, like I say, I was involved with the FAA in creating the new light support aircraft. The light support aircraft basically took what people used to think was a two-seat ultralight. There's no such thing as an ultralight by its definition, has to be single seat. They were trainers. They came from other countries, Britain, Australia, Germany, France, etc. Those were proper aircraft, although they looked flimsy, but they were proper aircraft. They complied with all the safety, CAA and the FAA aviation compliance that there would be. Those aircraft were, at that time, costing, let's say, about $18,000, maybe $22,000 to buy. One of our biggest things was, when this comes in, this new category of aircraft, and these new safety standards and these new regulations for build quality, etc., which in America you didn't have, but in the rest of the world we've always had. The manufacturers were saying, well, this would only represent maybe a 5 or 10% increase because they're going to build them the same way. It's just that they're going to be documented. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out now that $12,000 or $15,000 aircraft today is selling for $60,000 and $70,000. It hasn't changed in its design because it has to be built the way it is built in Britain, Germany, France, Australia. It's still compliant with those, and it's now under the ASTM standards, which were adopted, basically took those different ones and created a new one. So that aircraft is now way beyond anybody who used to fly, or used to be able to afford to fly. So the, as you would call it in America, the ultralight movement or flying community has basically collapsed. So now these aircraft are costing more than you can buy a second-hand 172. You know, and so I think that's maybe what we might see as things progress. As these costs go up, they'll just keep adding on because there's no incentive not to do that.
Right. And to Chris's point earlier, remember what the original congressional mandate was, to form an industry consensus standard, and the industry consensus standard was remote ID via radio broadcast. So what happened to, and the network-based solution was an optional standard. And Europe is adopting the radio broadcast standard in their remote ID program. So why would we, if the congressional mandate was use the consensus standard approach to building out this solution, why are we not using the consensus standard approach?
So was the group called Arc, A-R-C? Do I have that right? The ones, the committee that was put together of all the impacted parties. I think that's what it was, but I might be wrong. Anyway. Anybody else?
Sorry. Yeah, we don't have any other formal remarks prepared. We can continue to have Q&A. We can kind of wrap it up. Does anyone else have anything they want? Does anyone else have a soapbox they want to stand on about this?
I got something too about
Yeah.
the 5G.
Yeah.
5G, I don't know how many people know it, but 5G has been a military weapon basically for many, many years. It's just that they're taking that now and using it for your cell phone. 5G is causing problems in other European countries where they've been testing it. That is causing physical problems.
Really?
Depending where it's been. In Switzerland, there's a number of cases of people's health deteriorating now in certain regions of or ranges of the particular towers where they've had set up test stations. I'll send you some information
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
So that's
It's-
another
that's
worry
scary, the
that
way
you guys
things
may
are
not
popping
even
up.
know about.
Yeah, health-wise, it's kind of scary what it does. And just to make a comment, it's funny. I worked in the wireless field for 15 years, and all the RF engineers I worked with never had Wi-Fi in their house when they had a kid. And they said the same thing, you know, there might not be evidence of it, but
Yeah.
once you digitize that signal, it changes it. And again, if an RF engineer 10 years ago is having Wi-Fi in his house with a kid, that should tell you something about the new 5G.
That's like when microwaves first came up. It wasn't radioactive until people started getting cancer from the microwave.
Yeah, so you got headaches, tasted copper in your mouth.
Yeah, and you got to imagine, everywhere you go, you see nothing but copper lines. Right now, we're inside of a structure surrounded by copper.
Mhm.
You go outside, you're right down the street, nothing but copper.
DAC, Drone Advisory Committee, that's what I was trying to come up with.
All right. So I have a couple of links here. At the end, I'll, as I mentioned, I can send these slides out. Okay, maybe. Anyway, I'm just trying to get to my thank you slide, so we'll skip it. I'm happy to share these slides. It's pretty basic. I've got a couple of resources at the end. I'll add links to whatever people want to see. We'll add something to our website as well, North Coast Drone Alliance. website has got a resources area. I think this is totally appropriate to have some links about this material in there, so we'll add that as well. I think we're gonna try and put the video out as well. Okay, so these guys have been taking video as we've been discussing. If you want anything edited out, just let us know. Otherwise, it's just gonna go out on YouTube. Thanks for coming. Yeah, we really appreciate everybody's comments and questions, and I've learned a ton, and I think this is a huge issue, so I look forward to seeing how this evolves over the next couple of years.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you.